Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is the fourth installment in the Fatal Frame series, and this one first saw the light of day back in 2008 as a Japan exclusive on the Nintendo Wii. Now, if you've watched the first part of my deep dive into this series, you've already heard my Wii rant, so I'm not going to subject you to that torture again. Needless to say, my review pertains to the remaster that was released in 2023 on current-gen consoles and Steam. Story-wise, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, though fourth in release order, is the prequel to the first ever Fatal Frame game. And I honestly think the team did such a good job expanding upon the central characters and overarching narrative. If this team has proved one thing time and again, it's that they knock it out of the park with amazing connections that mirror the cyclical nature of ghost hauntings. Through the connections we see between our cast of characters and their ancestors, as well as the threat of Dr. Aso and his cursed camera obscura as the thumping heart beneath the floorboards, we get this very poetic twin notion of inevitability and inescapability that is so palpable in every single game in this series. And the execution of this mirrors the concept of a haunting. Really, this is a big reason why Fatal Frame is my all-time favorite horror series. Like in the other entries, we also get a strong showing from the soundscape. The music and sound effects all create a creepy and, at times, suffocating atmosphere of horror. Set partially in an abandoned hospital, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse even makes use of the PA system to shock us with some jarring, discordant interruptions. And again, I will say this over and over, Fatal Frame is the gold standard in soundscape design. Think another series does it better? Fight me! But seriously, it's top-notch. Part of the reason I think this is the case is because of the use of the environments to their fullest extent. We see this with the PA example, but we also see this with the creaks and groans of a primarily wooden building that has been warped by an incredibly moist island environment. Was that the ghostly moan of a vengeful spirit? Or was that the rotting wooden foundation of the building I'm in shifting? Either way, it's fucking terrifying. Time and again, we see horror come from not just the vengeful spirits staring down the barrel of our camera obscura, but from the creepy environments in which we find ourselves. On a mechanics level, I noted in my Made in a Black Water review, which is the fifth entry in the series, that the lines of dialogue from the actual spirits we were fighting often got lost in the soundscape. I knew they were there, but they were hard to focus on and pick out of a lineup while I was trying to snap pickies. Not so here. Don't know if the ratio was just more well-balanced, but I felt like it was easier to focus on the creepy things the ghosties were trying to tell me as I exercised them. So I guess the takeaway here is that Mask of the Lunar Eclipse gives another strong showing of a creepy soundscape, and they had an even better balance than in the next game in the series, Made in a Black Water. We also get what should have been some quality of life improvements, though these are plagued with issues of their own. Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is the first game in the series to move away from fixed camera angles. You actually move about the environment with a camera that can follow you, which should have allowed for much easier movement and interaction with the world. Lord, not so. It is a minor nuisance to move around at the best of times. At the worst of times, your character can't get through hospital curtains that one could easily brush aside because they are seemingly caught in an endless brushing aside curtains motion loop. Yeah, this happened to me. And trying to position your body just right and move your flashlight around to have the beam reveal an item you can pick up was probably the most horrifying thing in this game. There were several times I just abandoned the discovery of an item altogether because no matter how much I moved around, the item would not appear. And if that item is next to a door or another item, forget it. What the character will actually focus on and interact with is in God's hands, no matter what you think the perspective suggests should logically be interacted with. And here's where I have to step back and complain in general. This barely gets better in Made in a Black Water. There are 5 of these games and movement only gets marginally better? That's really not a good look. This is the first game in the series to also introduce ghostly hands that can interrupt your attempt to pick up an item and cause harm to you. It's a good idea in principle, but neither Mask of the Lunar Eclipse nor Made in a Black Water executed this mechanic well. In the former, the event barely triggered at all. In the latter, it triggered way too much. Pick a lane, y'all. Now maybe on harder difficulties, the ghostly hands make more attempts at grasping you and by extension soiling the integrity of your trousers, but I can't confirm. I'm a weenie. Normal mode for life, especially in a game that relies so heavily on reaction time. Now before we move on to the other elements of the game, I want to talk specifically about the Steam release of this game. For starters, it's the one I played. But there's one very important thing that became painfully clear to me completely by accident. I attempted 2 phases of this game while I was traveling. I packed light and didn't bring my gamepad. I thought, how bad could mouse and keyboard really be? Do not play this with mouse and keyboard. It is god-awful. A gamepad is perfectly integrated and works just fine, you know, apart from the movement issues that are just inherent to the game. But playing with mouse and keyboard may cause harm to your sanity, breakable objects in your house, and the computer that you just hurled at said breakable objects. The integration or lack thereof is shameful. Now, if you know anything about Made in Black Water's release on Steam, you know its initial release was marred by a mouse and keyboard fiasco. So at least they tried to get it right this time by having mouse and keyboard as an option from day one, but it is just bad. Adjusting the mouse sensitivity slider to the highest sensitivity made the movements of my mouse go from barely registerable to slow as molasses. Now, there is another option with keyboard where you use WASD to move, and 4 other keys, kind of like the directions of a right analog stick, but that was almost just as bad, especially in a game where you have to move your camera around and line up a shot. There really is no suitable replacement for an analog stick, and the team shouldn't have even tried with this half-ass fuck-a-doodle-doo. On a side note, I did see, because I'm super excited for the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection that will be coming out in October, that the Steam page for that game specifically states you will need a gamepad to play the original Metal Gear Solid. Not sure how common doing stuff like that was when Mask of the Lunar Eclipse was released on Steam, but the team just should have done this. God, what a fuck-up. With that out of the way, let's get to the story. Just like the other games, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse presents a beautifully woven and terrifying tale with connections that resonate across generations. That is, if you can keep it all straight. You see, similar to Made in Black Water's drops, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse splits up the gameplay into phases, which is a cute thematic name that gets at the phases of the moon, something that took me way too long to pick up on. You switch between playable characters as you uncover more and more fragments about what happened to the 5 girls who went missing during a performance of a Rogetsu Kagura from 10 years ago, 3 of them being playable characters, and why they've decided to come back. The problem inherent in this setup is it naturally works against the presentation of a coherent narrative. Personally, I enjoy having things broken up like this because, and please remember that Fatal Frame is my all-time favorite horror series, I need breaks when I play this game. I get stressed out and frustrated with clunky ghost battles fought in too narrow spaces, and I need to lick my wounds for a bit. In the older games in the series, if you got tired, you just have to save during one of the nights and hope that you would remember what it was you were supposed to be doing. At least with phases, I could tell myself, it can't be much longer, I'll just finish up this phase and then take a break. Really, that's the ideal format for me, but not so much for the story. Trying to keep everything straight in this wonderful, haunting narrative is a chore that only becomes more difficult with the chosen format. Now, I did actually do a few research videos where I did some deep dives and made sense out of the story for myself, but I'm not sure you can expect that much effort out of your more sane game players. But I will say that it's worth it to put that level of effort in. Another pain point in this game is the amount of hand-holding. You find a key to somewhere and the game immediately pulls up your map and drags your cursor to the location where the key should be used. Now, the maps can get pretty sprawling, so I sorta appreciate the gesture. But this place you need to use the key could be all the way across the map, or it could be right fucking next door. And like, the game's not that hard. For the most part, you have pretty clear direction regarding in which part of the map you should be looking. While I understand the intention, this came off as a bit of an insult to my intelligence. Especially as I shouted just moments ago, when the room was right fucking next door, for crying out loud. My final point again is a comparison to Made in Black Water. In my review of that one, I was baffled by the lack of jump scares. I realized that an over-reliance on jump scares is the refuge of crappy horror games, but Made in Black Water woefully underperformed in this department. Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, I think, strikes the perfect balance with some really solid jump scares at crucial moments. This seems to be a common theme between the two games, where one strikes a better balance with soundscape design, for example, the other strikes a better balance with something else. If only these two games could merge and give us the horrifying baby we deserve from this series. Koei Tecmo, I'm standing by to present you a script that may or may not have been cannibalized from my various Fatal Frame fanfiction. Curious? Aroused? I'll bet you are. All in all, I think this is another solid entry in the Fatal Frame series that tells one hell of a gripping story that both holds its own when compared to the others and positions itself nicely within the overarching narrative. The gameplay can be frustrating because of the, at times, god-awful movement, but the horror experience more than makes up for any shortcomings, at least in my opinion.